everyone. This is Amy from Star and Splendor. Some of you might remember, or maybe you haven't seen yet, that I did an interview with Josh Schwartzbach a couple months ago to talk with him about his channeling of the Oversoul SOTU. And we're back again today because we're going to actually do part two, which is to speak with SOTU. I'm really excited. Josh Schwartzbach, he and his wife Adrienne have the Peace Genesis project that they're working on and developing content, and they've got programming for. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that in this interview. But I would like to introduce Josh. So Josh, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. we've got a 3-second delay here, so hi. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be here, and I think we on the reemergence of humanity from our basements. I think it's a real opportunity for us all to be able to hear from an energy that's been outside of all of this. So I'm happy. I'm ready. I'm raring to go. Ready to get started anytime you are.
Great. So, well, let's ask SOTU to come through that.
Okay, so this is a very easy process for me. If you've seen other channels, a lot of people go through really strange and interesting dances when they're connecting with the energies. But I've been channeling professionally for darn near 30 years now, and so it's a very easy process for me. So just to describe what's going to happen, I'm going to close my eyes, sit back in the chair, take a couple of deep breaths. It's been said that if you're sensitive, people can actually see the energy coming in through the top of my head, but since I'm not here, I can't see it. So if you can, that's great. And if not, here it is. So I'll close my eyes, and within 10-15 seconds, they'll be here and they will greet you, and we'll go from there. Okay? Okay. So here we go. Right. Well. Give us a moment. All right. Whoa, it's us. Hello, Amy. How are you, dear one? Nice to be speaking with you today. We're promised to not give you too much trouble.
You never give me trouble, SOTU. This is probably, I don't know if this is the second or third time that we've spoken, but I've always enjoyed it. So I'm happy to be speaking with you as well.
All right. Well, we haven't done that personal reading yet, have we?
So SOTU, I have maybe it's a difficult or maybe it's an easy question for you. If you could explain to me, I understand that you're an oversoul.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if you might be able to explain to me and to others a little bit, what does that mean?
Well, even that in its own way is a misnomer. One must understand the definition of soul and the dynamic. Of course, we personify these pieces of yourself so that you might be able to more clearly understand them. You have to understand that each of you, whether you are aware of it or not, has a personal soul that is actively responsible for, what shall we say, presenting the opportunities of the timeline that you have chosen to experience within this particular physical incarnation. So you have an aspect of soul that is really up close and personal. And the thing about it is that if you are not following your path and you're not, what shall we say, accomplishing those things that you wish to accomplish in a lifetime, because choice is all, the dynamic of choice is always there, well, then your soul is going to keep giving you opportunities to have those experiences. And if it happens to be an experience like you came into a lifetime really wishing to learn about love, your soul is going to keep giving you opportunities to learn about love, usually by giving you the wrong choices, so that you might experience what not to do rather than what to do. So, any of you out there that might have had repetitive dynamics around the situations around love, your soul is trying to speak to you. Now, soul has it's an interesting dynamic. At a certain point, they'll give up. If you're just are so
Mm.
stubborn that you just refuse to read any of the reflections or see any of the greater meanings in reality in life, well, then soul will speak to you really loudly, and then it'll stop and you can deal with it next lifetime. So but then there is the overriding dynamic of your oversoul, your personal oversouls, who are more prevalent in the dynamics of the more than one the overview of more than one lifetime, and so they really have your greater plan in their existence. And now that exists on the personal level, with the personal incarnation, with the personal spark of all that is. Okay, but then there is a greater dynamic that has to do with the soul of a different species. Like right now, we're talking about the soul of humanity. Now, there is a greater soul even than that, and that is the universal soul. Well, we're even more than that, if you really wish to
Mm.
put us in the dynamic of a place. Now, we come through it now, well, as you can all well know, if you're paying any sort of attention at all, you're at a place in your reality, you're at a place in your existence where there is. Well, you used the word yourself a few moments ago. There is incredible uncertainty, and that uncertainty is purposeful. It's purposeful. It is
Mhm.
intended to show you where your reality is not working, where the things that you have believed have were not fair, were not, in other words, the system that you have had and has carried you forward without judgment, has carried you forward a tremendous amount. You have grown as a species a tremendous amount. If you just consider how much you've grown in the last 100 years, you can say, wow, 100 years ago, you were primitive compared to what you are right now. If you even consider back to the year 2000, only 20 years ago, internet was just beginning. All of this dynamic of technology and interaction and possibility of interaction were just beginning to happen. And so it has come such a tremendous distance in a decade. So you have to understand, and from a soul's point of view, this is a very crucial time, which is why we chose to come through a physical body now, one that has had a life, a physical body that has had a real life, not some one of these fantasy lives that people lead that are all, what shall we say, unicorns and rainbows. Because the dynamic of spirituality is as pragmatic as you are, right? You are
Mhm.
physical. You can reach out and you can touch yourself. This is the plane of existence where you are. So it behooves you all to begin to bring in the dynamics of, what shall we say, the more spiritual aspects of self. And spirit does not necessarily mean what you all think it does. All right. It's actually much more expansive, and it is much more freewheeling than any of you in your desire to control your realities. Um, we can't go on and on, can't we? So,
Yeah, no, it's okay. I'm letting you finish.
well, but as long as we are not boring you all, as and
No.
that is important because, as we say, we can go on. So, and we are going on. So here's
Well, so
the
too, let
situation
me,
in.
sorry.
Well, we're explaining the dynamic of soul. We're explaining why we came into this dynamic of physical incarnation. We have never worked with anyone before through a complete lifetime, right? We first made contact with him when he was entering the womb. Actually, we were the energy that came to him and said, don't you think you'd like to incarnate now? And he said, not really. And we said, yeah, you really would, wouldn't you? And he said, not really. And we said, we'll be really nice to you and give you a lot of gifts. And he said, okay. So it took a little, it doesn't, the other side, the dynamics of choice exists just like on this side. And so it is our job.
Okay.
We are motivating. We are here to remind you who you really are. We are really here to remind you that each and every one of you are manifesting your personal realities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, if you realize that, and you realize that whatever you're manifesting is what you believe, then you might realize that you might want to create for yourself the most flexible belief system possible in order to be able to create the most miraculous reality for yourself possible. Now, we're not talking unicorns and rainbows. We are talking hammers and nails and wood and things like that. We're talking about creating a dynamic of a tangible reality for yourself. Isn't it odd that as we and a number of others are beginning to utilize the word peace more and more and more, suddenly the orange guy is creating peace in the Middle East. They are doing a signing. Today's the 15th of September in 2020, and they're doing a signing ceremony right now between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. And in the dynamics of movement of soul, that is huge. Now, we're going to share something with you. Every time there
Okay.
is a big movement forward, also comes a dynamic of the past being offered. In other words, if you take a step forward in your reality and you do, let's say, you do a dynamic of healing within yourself. And as we said a little earlier, the easiest life lesson is people learning come into a life wishing to really learn about love. So we're going to use that as an example because it's the simplest one. There's are you going to if you're going to come into a lifetime wishing to learn about love, are you going to give yourself loving parents? Probably not, because then you'll know what love is. Ah. But if somehow that love is taken away, father is deceased, divorce, any mother, any sort of dynamic in that sort of way, well, then you're going to suffer a hurt. You're going to suffer an abandonment. And you will probably, and it will be your soul's responsibility, your personal soul's responsibility to keep giving you those opportunities. And it's what we call the great are you sure? This is all dynamics that are well, these are all dynamics that are understandable psychologically. These are all situations that are
Sure.
buried in your subconscious. When you come into your mother, when you incarnate in within your mother, when your nervous system connects with her nervous system, you are programmed with all of her beliefs, with all of her judgments, with all of her fears, with all of her desires. And that dynamic of energy is what so many of you, that's why you choose your mother with a great deal of interest, is because whether you're a male or a female, your nervous system's going to connect with hers, and your initial programming is going to be exactly where she was when you were born. Now, you have a sister or brother comes along 3 or 4 years later, they're going to have different programming because she's not going to be the same
Mhm.
person. So now, if you want to know the difference between your kids, you can look to yourself and find that out.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Well,
true. Definitely true for
if you're
me.
honest enough with, if one is honest enough with oneself in that sort of dynamic. So again, the dynamic of soul is that urge to be more. It may seem to be coming from the outside, but it is the template that you chose previous to incarnating in this particular lifetime.
Mhm.
What a long answer that
Right.
was. Does that satisfy you?
Well, that's right. Yeah, no, that satisfies me. I mean, it does, it definitely addresses what you yourself are in some approximation, but also an explanation of soul and choice is always important. Um, but I think, were you also intimating, was I understanding you correctly when you were saying, look how far we've come just in 20 years? Is it your feeling that things have kind of sped up for humanity in
Oh,
some
they are.
respects?
Yeah. Well, not just sped up. They're folding in on itself. Time is in many ways
Mm,
folding in on itself. And so you're getting, instead of having a timeline where things seem to be stretched out, instead you have a timeline that folding over on itself because you are reaching the culmination, you're reaching the crossroads of choice that your humanity, that you all chose to be here for. You know, no one lives or dies by
mm.
accident from our perspective. So you all chose to be here at this very crucial time, this very transformational time in human growth, in human movement, because so many of you wanted to say, well, I was there, I helped.
Well, so what are we? So if we're at this crossroads, what does that mean for people who are here now? What should we be doing on a sort of practical scale, even if you can address that? Like, what in the day to day is going to be most useful for us at this time?
Integrity. It's a really simple answer. Fairness and integrity. If you use fairness and integrity in all of the choices that you make, you will begin to move more into that place. But, you know, see, the problem here is the divisiveness that exists in your world right now. And that device, and we're not, politics are verboten, by the way. Uh, um, the even though it plays a huge part, it is a dynamic that no one is talking about the solution. The right is firmly standing in their um, version of the truth, and the left is firmly standing in their version of the truth. And yet, the truth is that neither truth is really the truth. That the truth, in
Mm,
fact, is that you have been living in a system where you have, instead of taking responsibility for your system. You have abdicated that responsibility to the government itself, which is just a system, which is just a bureaucracy. And so instead of looking at the dynamic as a whole, instead of looking at the dynamic through human eyes, you instead look at the dynamic through bureaucratic eyes. And so you have a situation right now where what we call the ruling class is exacerbating the dynamics of divisiveness and has so many of you convinced that you are victims or perpetrators of institutional racism. And we would say that the United States of America, this in 2020, is one of the least racist countries on the planet. So what we would call the controllers, the ruling class, those that you have allowed, you haven't created it, but you've allowed it to happen because you have so enough of you have been benefited by that system and made to believe that it would perpetuate, it would last forever. But in fact, it was flawed in so many ways. And so instead of taking responsibility for your realities, you gave it over to government, who gave it over to the bureaucracy, and it became a big old scam, which eventually got to the point where the gears were not grinding together, were not meshing together in the proper way. And so what you've got is a breakdown of a machine going on right now. Now, the big question is it a dynamic of nationalism? Is it a dynamic of globalism? Or is it a dynamic of personal sovereignty? And that whole, yeah, right. Because you have that movement, that whole dynamic of what's being offered, you know, you can break it down very simply. An advanced civilization measures itself by how well the least of its people are doing. A very simple
Right.
dynamic like that can begin to change everything. To begin to use the word fairness, the system, the way it is right now, does not work. There are too many people being left behind. There's too many homeless. And especially now, how many of you out there are suffering in a tremendous amount of fear because you have no job? You don't know, how you're going to support your family. It doesn't look like at least 30% of the jobs are not going to come back. And the predictions are it's going to be even more. How are you going to survive? Well, you're going to survive because the government is going to reach into its deep pocket and is going to say, okay, we've got basic income for you all. And they have you
Hmm.
because now you're dependent on
Well,
your
that's
government.
social.
Now you're totally dependent on your government, right?
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter
Yeah.
is,
I mean,
okay, let us just finish this thought, okay? The truth of the
sure.
matter is, you need to all have you are very you live in a duality, and so you grow through a dynamic of friction. And so when you compete with each other, you in fact, and if you do it fairly, and if you do it, from heart, you can compete from the heart. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. You can compete with gaining positive things, with doing positive things. Who's going to do, but what needs to happen is that stress around survival needs to be taken away. And there is more than enough wealth on your planet to be able to do that. And that is your big task, to find that place to go where you can provide at least a survival level, but probably two or three kicks up from survival level of food, water, shelter, healthcare, and education. If you have these five things taken care of, you have an equal start. Everyone has an equal start. then the fun really begins, because then humanity begins to explore the positive aspects of who you are rather than always competing with each other for survival. So the transcendence is to move out of a survival of the fittest dynamic, which is where your economy is now, with crony capitalism and, you know, um, um, a small percentage of your population owns 90% of the wealth, and the rest of you fight over the other 10%. Well, that's got to change.
You must be watching. I heard that Josh likes to watch a lot of news. You must be watching a lot of news with him, huh?
Well, it's his job. you,
Yeah.
you, it's his job. How else are you going to have perspective? You know,
Yeah.
we,
Yeah. Right.
why would we come through a human being if we weren't going to put them to work? But yes, this one
But
spends this one spends 2 to 4 hours every morning on the internet, on the computer, and yes, he will watch TV in the evening until he goes, ah, I can't watch this anymore, and turns it off. So yes, he's well informed in that sort of way, and so therefore, so are we.
okay. So, well, I don't know if you really answered my question about. Well, we talked about integrity and we talked about fairness, but um, and we touched a little bit on healing, which I want to get into a bit more. But as far as like the practical day to day, and being in awareness that we're at this crossroads. But for those who are feeling all that tension right now, what is what should be the mindset, or what should be their best approach to their daily life at this time?
Well, again, we're not telling you to get all Pollyanna, but we are telling you to spend more time in more positive energy. And you can spend more time in positive energy by remembering times in the past that you loved, were being loved, would be loved, loved received, love given, dynamics of really good things that have happened in your life. You can, in other words, instead of worrying about what's going to, how you're going to pay the bills tomorrow, you might be able to spend a little time and a little quiet, a couple of deep breaths, go inside, go into your imagination, and remember that time when your grandmother gave you $1,000 and how good that felt energetically, to have wealth or have a dynamic of energy come from out of the blue. And so by changing your resonance, changing the dynamics of what is going on within you, you can begin to change that whole situation. Now, the problem here is that, as we said, the so many of you have gotten yourself into situations that are untenable at this point. And so you are faced with certain dynamics, and these are soul dynamics. You have to understand, if you're facing a crisis right now, this is what you gave yourself for now. And so, by facing that dynamic, by facing the fear, by thinking outside of the box, by spending a little time in positive resonance, it gives you the opportunity, it gives your soul the opportunity to speak to you in a way that will allow you to achieve what you wish to achieve. Because if you're not creating enough for yourself right now, the question ultimately is, are you going to redouble your efforts and create enough for yourself? Or are you going to rely upon the system to do it for you? And that's ultimately the choices that are being given to you all right now. Now, none of you have to do it alone. And that's one of the things that we're working on right now. You were talking about the dynamic of the Peace Genesis Project. The Peace Genesis Project is all about healing and is all about forgiveness. We begin with, we talked to you about the dynamic of how you're programmed when you first come into a lifetime. Well, that's what we consider your life lesson. We will work with you in the Peace Genesis Project to identify that dynamic, to allow you to see what your own life lesson is, to metaphorically create a dynamic that you can actually heal it. And as you do that
Mm.
dynamic of healing, within an hour to 24 hours after you're done, your reality is going to offer you the same old to see if you take it. That's the are you sure? Now, when that
Mm.
happens, and so many of you are
Yeah,
surprised, go ahead, say it again,
yeah, but
please.
eventually that fades, right?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. If you really do it well, it only takes one time. But if you've given a lot of ambiguous messages in your life, it might take a little longer. In other words, how many times has this come around on your soul's path that, this particular situation is happening? Often, those of you that are suffering right now, the easiest thing is money, because so many jobs have been snatched away. Um, um, if you're suffering that dynamic, it's not the first time. It's not the first time. It's because you have again. So with each person, we would say that the way to deal with the dynamic of fear is to face it. Certainly, you can counter it. You can counter it by using your imagination and using the dynamic of emotion and stepping out, remembering that feeling. Remember it. Remembrance is one of the
Mm.
most important things that you have. Experience leads to wisdom. Wisdom leads to mastery. Mastery. You'd all like it. Very few of you have it. All right. But again, so we do the dynamic. We're creating. We have actually the Peace Genesis Project is the result of 30 years of work, 30 years of channeling. It is the net result of um, what channel we say interacting with thousands, because we have not created this alone. We have co-created it with you. And so we are, and for now, for now, it is the perfect time for healing. But more than healing, you need to be able to move into a place of forgiveness. And that's can be really tough for a lot of people, because there are some things that have happened in your life that are perhaps unforgivable. You begin that journey by taking a step forward and saying, well, in my understanding, in my healing, I might be able to understand why that person, that situation occurred in my lifetime. Because usually, if it's a person, it was because something similar was done to them. So they're just repeating negative behavior upon you. Now, if you can understand for yourself what you learned from it, because yes, there was a negative situation. It probably was very traumatic in its own way, but we would suggest that you learned something. And if you understand what you learned from it, then the possibility of forgiveness becomes even more profound. Now, healing and forgiveness puts you in that dynamic of that place where you understand fairness, where you understand the dynamics of integrity, where you understand the dynamics that your whole species is on a journey of transformation. And you can take a more active role in that because you are not locked into your old negative dynamics. And so the Peace Genesis Project is intended as a first step toward freedom, real freedom.
That sounds great, actually. Uh, I think one of the things that I was listening to one of your previous segments, I think where you were speaking through Josh about the healing between the male and female dynamic, or
Mhm.
between that sort of that polarity. So how does that come into play? And can you give some thoughts about that? I'm interested to hear.
Oh, we got another 2 hours. Well,
Let's try to keep it to like
you're
6 minutes or
right,
under
right. Uh,
for
okay,
now.
all right, all right. First of all, you have had many lifetimes as both. Would you agree with that? Both male and female.
Sure. Yes.
And so, because
Yes.
of that, each of you has a mixture of masculine and feminine energy within you. Okay? You have both. Otherwise, women wouldn't be able to manifest and men wouldn't be able to dream. Because in the dynamics of the masculine and the feminine, the true masculine, the true feminine, and how that energy was intended to work together, the feminine, in fact, is the dreamer. The feminine is the piece of self that has the new idea, that gets the gestalts of information, that then has to translate. It's the reasonable one, but it's also the nurturer and the one that is mm, fully emotional in their being. All right. The wait. The masculine is the manifester. The masculine is intended to take the dream, is intended to take the new idea and to manifest it. Now, that's not male and female. Understand, we're not talking about male and female. We're talking about masculine energy and feminine energy. And we would suggest that you, dear one, have a great deal of masculine energy simply by the amount of manifestation that pops up all around you.
Well, I've been at it a while.
We do understand that, but you're still just a mere chicken.
This is more the masculine and feminine energy. This isn't necessarily between the sexes.
Oh no, the Battle of the Sexes is a whole different movie. Eh, 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 you know,
I'm
to understand it, okay, to understand it, we don't want to get too archaic here, but it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve,
Mhm.
and it goes all the way back to that legend, and that legend accurately describes what occurred in that garden separation, in that dynamic of being supposedly humanity being thrown out of the garden. Okay, but it took, first of all, it's a tale, and it's a tale that encapsulates
Yes.
a moral. And the moral of the story is, the moral of the story is that earthly humanity in the garden experience was involved in a dynamic of a collective consciousness. Was, if you have ever seen a flock of birds, all flying starlings especially, all flying, thousands of them in the same direction, and all of a sudden they wheel and turn, and there's none of them bounce into each other. How do they do that? Well, that's
Mhm.
collective consciousness in its truest form. Same thing with you as a species. You were primates and all of that stuff, but you pretty much had a collective awareness. If we took you back to a meditation of that time, you would find it very unsatisfying because there would be no sense of I. There would be only the sense of we.
I would be I would think of myself as the starling that got inspired to change direction, and then everybody went with me.
or crashed into you, one or the other.
Yeah, but hopefully not.
Leader of the pack.
But yeah, I can sort of see what you mean. I think I did hear that story from you before, and um, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. At some point, it was no longer satisfactory, is
Well,
what you're saying.
again, what's the quickest way to learn something? It was like it was the childhood of your species. A child needs to have that sort of dynamic of encapsulation, that sort of nurture in order to grow. And so we're getting to your original question, which is where did the schism between the masculine and the feminine come from? Because that's what we're getting to here. Because the schism that came was all the way back then, all right? Because if you describe the energy, the way the Bible presents it, of Adam and Eve, that Eve was adventurous, Eve was out there, Eve was looking for new things, and Eve was kind of dreaming the new dream, and she wasn't really satisfied with paradise. After so many millennium, paradise can get boring. And so there was that desire, that inner desire for movement and all of that stuff. So the easiest way, here now we're going to get a little woo woo on you. The easiest way to experience something is to invite something in from the outside to teach it to you. So here's the species of collective consciousness, collective awareness, who was beginning to have a desire to be more. So the next step is to
Mhm.
move from a dynamic of collective consciousness to a dynamic of individual consciousness. So, there might have been another species out there exploring their part of the universe who came in and said, well, let's check out that little blue planet over there. And instead of finding any sort of civilization, anything, all they found was these little primates who were seemingly unable to connect with them in any sort of way. So what wound up happening was that because of the dynamic of collective awareness, all you had to do was have one of you connect with one of them, and all of a sudden, you had the feeling, you as a species, everyone in that species connected in that sort of way, had the feeling of what it meant to be an individual. And the other species, and we can go into that in more detail at some point if you wish, the other species had the experience of complete belonging, complete connection, complete love, complete acceptance. And each species wished to have a lot more of what the other had. So that is how the original dynamic. So when you talk about Adam and Eve and the snake were this other species that knew about individuality. So your Bible says what? It says that Eve met the snake. Eve met the reptilian. The reptilian said, "Hey, I'm going to teach." The reptilian said nothing. The connection with the reptilian taught her about individuality. All right, the emotional connection, the collective consciousness, connecting with the reptilian. All of a sudden, she knew what I was, and she wanted Adam to experience the same thing. So the dreamer, the more expansive part, initiated the dynamic with the masculine, with the male of the species. And so that dynamic. Now, they ate from the tree of knowledge. Well, do you remember what the knowledge gained was? They were naked.
Yeah, I mean,
They
they
were
were self.
naked in the sight of God.
Yeah, they were self.
They were right,
Right.
self conscious. They had a sense of self. and it's been there all the time. And so the result of the dynamic is that all of a sudden you could not manifest collectively anymore. And it didn't happen instantaneously. It was somewhat incremental, but it got to the point where you were all became more individual, and you began to, you go this way and you go that way, and instead of being a big collective, you began to separate into little tribal groups, because instead of the fruit and things
So it
just
did happen immediately.
say it again.
I mean, I said it didn't happen immediately. What about the lightning flash?
Well, that happened immediately. But tell us what happens
Okay.
immediate. Tell us what happens immediately in your world. Change,
What happens
change,
immediately now?
change is
Yeah,
instantaneous. All right, change is instantaneous, but
sure.
then it usually takes you decades to adjust to the change. So,
Right,
and
right.
that's where you're at
True.
right now. All of the foundations, all of the certainties are being removed. Question ultimately is, how bad do you want it to get before you begin to take a more assertive role? And we're talking especially those of you that consider yourself spiritual, and we don't care what kind of spirit, really, really, really. That heart connection with the divine is the same for all of you. You may interpret it differently for yourself through your own particular template, through your own particular lens, but it is the commonality that you have, that connection, that heart connection. And, you know, you have permission to do anything as long as you do not lie. So if you have to lie about it, then we would suggest you might want to avoid it, because it is only through deception, it is only through you lying or someone lying to you that you can be hurt. And each time you are lied to in your dynamic, if we were to expose the dynamic of your etheric body, you would see there's all sorts of cuts, there's all sorts of gashes, there's all sorts of slashes in it during the time for the times that you have been lied to. And if you look to your own throat
Mhm.
chakra, that's where you're going to find your own injuries for every time that you have lied. So it's important. Now, integrity is also an incremental journey, because in this dynamic of
Why
competition,
is it that? Why is it the lie of all things? That's so interesting to me. Not saying that it's okay to lie. I'm a terrible liar. And I hate lie. I mean I don't lie. I have lied when I've been trying to stop someone's feelings from being hurt, but that's never worked out for me.
it
But
never
why
works out for
lie?
anyone. Never works out for anyone. So again, you often will tell people what you want. That's not kind of lie we're talking about. You know,
Okay. What
we're
kind of lie are you talking about? Be specific. Give an example.
cheating on your husband, but where your husband doesn't know about it. That's the easiest one, or a husband cheating on his wife. Same sort of deception. Everything may seem to be hunky dory at home, but in fact, she's suffering a hurt and often doesn't know why. Or he is suffering a hurt and often doesn't know why. Because the masculine, believe it or not, from our perspective, the masculine is so much more emotional than the feminine in that sort of way. So, because that's where the masculine manifests from. The masculine manifests from emotion. So they don't often show that dynamic of emotion so often, because they're encapsulating it to be able to constantly being in a place of manifestation. Now, if you know this, you can balance your dynamic out a little more. You can engage the dynamic of dreaming in with your doing. You can engage the dynamic of doing in with your dreaming. If you're involved in a partnership with someone of the opposite sex, then, or even someone of the same sex who's playing the opposite role, you can, in fact, work as a team in order to be able, one of you is going to be better at dreaming and the other is going to be better at manifestation. Now, if you, not that you should absolutely do one person take one role and the other person take the other role, but have that understanding, that level of awareness, that level of consciousness. It will make your life much easier.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about.
Well, yeah, but again, you've got to make it simple. You've got to make it simple. Look at the complexity. Look at the complication that exists in the dynamic of your world. We keep trying to break it down to the simple: food, water, shelter, healthcare, education equals start. Okay. Measure your civilization by how well the least of you are doing, not the best. Simple, very understandable, emotionally understandable. Same situation here. Do not lie. Have integrity. Well, what does that mean? What's the worst? Why does the masculine and the feminine most often have a negative interaction? It's because both have unreasonable expectations. You know, people are not students
Yeah.
of humanity. Very few of you know who you actually are. And as you discover,
Yeah.
and we're not talking to you about this, Amy, we're talking to the audience as much as anything. That you know each of you as individuals have your own issues, but each of you in the dynamic of your collective also have, what shall we say, things that can be solved simply by changing your attitude, not having to do necessarily
Mhm.
great levels of healing. It simply comes from making a different choice.
Yeah, so I this came up recently where I was talking about I had actually filmed like a YouTube video last week after a little hiatus because I was talking about having felt like a lot of joy through this sort of COVID period and then kind of dipping into a more, I would say, more productive, but definitely more negative
Hmm.
experience as negative, a darker time, right? Sort of a, not a black night of the soul, but kind of a negredo or like the black dragon part of the alchemical cycle where
Yep.
you sort of have to face the things that you need to work on, right?
Right.
But I was talking with a friend and I was saying how I had very little tolerance anymore for, like like hearing the detail, like the political like details hashed out in sort of negative ways, and just I have become more discerning about the types of conversations I wanted to have. And my friend said, well, you need like, you're more high vibration, right? So you need like a higher vibrate. You're trying to raise the vibration, so you're not wanting to go down there and get engaged with that. And I thought, well, that's kind of a, I
Elitist.
don't want to be like that. I don't want to say like, oh,
It's a better
I don't
than.
want to say, I don't want to make a judgment. What's that?
It's a better than. It's a dynamic of better than. I'm
Yeah,
above it. I'm not,
right,
I, but it's not true because you're not above it. In fact,
right. So
go ahead.
no, I'm not, I'm not above it, but I'm trying to bring more of it
You're
into my attitude.
right. You are being more objective instead of, what do they call it? Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance. Do you know what that is?
Right.
Yeah, cognitive
Yes. Yeah.
dissonance is when you see something and reality is completely different, but you keep believing the lie because it would completely screw up your whole belief system, and you just can't possibly accept that dynamic because it's just, oh, I'd have to die because I'm just. You're telling me
Right.
Donald Trump is good? You know, But you see, that's the thing. Just that statement alone just triggered 5,000 people out there.
Sure, sure, sure,
Okay, so
sure.
but
Yeah, but I'm seeing that on both sides with everybody.
yeah, well, but that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to be objective. That's what we were talking about a little while ago, a little earlier when we were talking about the dynamic of nobody's offering solutions because everyone's locked in their side of being right. And so instead of the politicians and those people offering solutions to real problems, looking at the situation and saying, well, we've really driven this truck as far as we can, but the engine is about to seize. So maybe we better trade it in for a different vehicle. Instead of looking at your reality with that type of sanity and that type of reasonableness, instead each side is entrenched in their own opinion and they're going to fight it out. And so the our suggestion over the last 6 months has been step back, don't get involved in it because neither side is correct. There's a third position that in fact addresses the problems of both sides.
Right. And it's sort of like now going back to your sort of masculine feminine dynamic, this is the time that we need dreaming. And this is the time when we need to be planting those seeds of manifestation. This
Right.
is the work that we're supposed to be doing.
Right, right. But instead, what is happening now is through the dynamic of divisiveness and wow, through the dynamic of victimhood that it exists in your reality right now, especially in the United States. Holy moly, when did you all become such weaklings? You know, when did that happen? When did you go on war? When did you start a war against death? It doesn't,
I'm
it
cool
just,
with that. I'm down. I'm down
well, but you
in a
understand,
creative sense.
right, 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 right. So um, yeah, death and rebirth is a whole different story. And that's a whole dynamic. Words are very important. The words that you use, and so many people are starting to talk about in your world right now that are locked into this political BS. They're talking about a reset. Well, every time they say reset, you say rebirth because it's a
I
reset
like that.
is very limited. It's it's going to reset within a dynamic. In other words, everything's going to go back to zero, or there's going to be a rebirth with all of the possibilities that comes from that. It's just such a minor thing, but if each of you who has heard this begins to utilize that little change in your words, it's going to make a big difference. And again, you do not realize the power that you have as a collective because you are all have been kept separate. And now, as you begin to come back together, the opportunity is going to be there for you to come together in groups to really be able to make some differences, to really be able to speak truth in a new and a more enlightened and conscious way. So we think you're going
So
to
how
do
should
it.
we find our people then?
Please say
How
it
do we
again.
find our people then?
They'll find you. They'll find you. They'll find you. You have to listen. Project ahead 6 months. Okay, winter's coming. Okay, you live in the Northeast. You know what winter's like. Are you prepared?
Yes.
All right. Well, if you're prepared in that sort of way, then you will be fine. But how many in your world are not? And those people are
Right.
going to be right, the vast majority. And those people who are hoping for things to come back to normal, it ain't gonna happen. Not in the way that you had it before, because the reason that it all broke was because it didn't work well in the first place. So you have to make some
Mm-hmm.
adjustments. So that means that each of you, in your own way, has to take more responsibility. Now, that soul that we were talking about is either going to force it, or you're going to do it with a little more elegance and grace than that. But you're going to do it one way or the other because that's what you chose.
I don't want to pull that tower card again for the equinox. I'm not going kicking.
Well, then you better not look. Because
I really prefer like the priestess. I want to,
well, what
like
see
gracefully
the
treat it.
situation. The situation is that you just had to. Those of you that are, excuse us, the leaders in this movement, and this is not for a better than. This is to understand that you tend to have the situations that other people are going to face a little ahead of them in order to prepare you for them. So the dragon, the dark night of the dark night of the soul is coming up with the equinox, or with the 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 solstice, right? Winter solstice this year, December 21st, is going to be just intense, and so that period of time between the equinox now and the solstice, you're going to see for so many is going to be a dark night of the soul, and that's where you're needed. You see, that's where people are needed.
Yeah.
That's where the healing is needed. That's where the
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness is needed, because and people don't realize that they can go within themselves. They have the power. All they have to do is be taught how to
Yeah.
use it. That's it. And that's what we
Right.
wish to
Right.
do. And that's what we wish to do with the PGP, is have people learn how they manifest the reality that they do. So if they're not happy with it, they can change it. But,
Mm.
again, we say that first step
Yeah.
is integrity. It's being honest with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, this is coming up now. I'm hearing about a lot of people who are creating sort of, now that we're over the hump of there was like a surge in the number of coaches and spiritual people who are getting on Zoom and offering things. Now that we're sort of over the hump of that, there are people that are creating really unique and really useful offerings like that right now. So I, I definitely have felt that call myself. I mean, I was hearing from a lot of people coming in that they really wanted a women's group, which is something that I wasn't offering before. I didn't feel called to do, but once I started hearing about it from so many people and really seeing the need, because there were a lot of people coming in who just were not
We don't
finding
agree.
their community coming out. What?
We don't agree. A women's group is
No,
needed because you're all victims of the masculine.
no,
There
not
is no
that
such
way.
thing as an
No,
empowered
no, no,
feminine.
no.
You need to exclude the masculine. You need to exclude half of your species because you cannot communicate with them, because you don't wish to make the effort,
No, no,
because it's a club.
no, it wasn't anything like that. No, no, it's not
No.
anything like that. It's not meant in that way. No, I
Listen.
agree. That's not what we are trying to do.
We listen. We understand what you're saying, okay, and we understand that your intention is
Mm-hmm.
good, okay, but the again, the healing needs to be done on a special level, and as soon as you exclude half the species from what you're doing, from the dynamics of healing, from the dynamics of learning about integrity, about learning about emotion, about learning about heart, is your are your beliefs so fragile that by inviting in the masculine, it's going to somehow ruin your intent?
No, I don't think that's what this is about. I think you're missing it. I think this is more
W-
about creating a space out of which to act with more integrity, toward that balance.
Okay,
That's what I think it's about.
okay,
That's what I think it's.
okay. We're not
I
going to
think it's about coming out of that.
time.
Right. I think it's about coming out of that more healed to be able to uh, be present in relationships and in the reality and in the balance.
Okay.
So,
In relationships with other women or in relationships with the men in their lives?
I mean, in all relationships.
Okay. What we're trying to tell you is that you're going to get a limited view that is going to be self reinforcing. And in fact,
Okay.
if some of the, if in fact your intent is to create that dynamic of opportunity, of healing between the masculine and the feminine and the masculine, then you need to accept both.
Well, I do, in essence, accept both. But I don't think that some of the things that women want to talk about, they don't necessarily want to talk about with other
Why?
men.
Why?
And also, when it comes, and also, there's the biological facts. The embodiment of a spirituality for a female is different than it is for a male,
True, but
at
it's
least from
not
my
any more
perspective.
powerful. It is not, it's just different. It's not any better or
Exactly.
any
But
worse. It's just different.
no, it's not. It's not about that. It's about the fact that I think many women don't really understand it and they don't really know how to utilize it.
Okay. Um, okay. So we're not going to argue with you about this, although we could. And are prepared to go for another 15 or 20 minutes if you really wish to. But we'll let you slide this time.
No,
But
no,
we
I
would,
mean, we
here,
can cut that
here's
part.
what we would say to you in this sort of circumstance. If the situations were reversed, if you had a situation where you had, let's say, 10, 11 men want to come in and have a men's meeting every so often, would you rent them the space? Would you feel
Oh,
curious?
absolutely. I would love.
So, would you feel curious?
Would I feel?
Curious
Oh, sure.
about, would you feel left out?
No.
The masculine would. That's the difference. That's the difference. The masculine would, men look at women's group and feel left out, women's groups and feel left out. When
Why?
men look, huh? Why? Why do they feel
Why?
left out?
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
obviously that men are so loathsome that, from a woman's point of view, that they cannot be trusted with the real dynamics of emotional situation that exists within the heart of the feminine. They cannot be trusted with that sort of dynamic, so they are excluded. So it basically shows a lack of trust. Now, not that the reality is offering you too many masculine templates that are trustworthy these days, but there aren't too many feminine templates that are trustworthy either. From our experience, we know that the greatest enemy that the feminine has is the feminine, is other women.
I mean, I would agree with that.
Yeah. So
And that's part
So
of
you're
the
saying to us,
that's part of the
you realize you just made our point, right? Well, what we're saying is, generally speaking, that on the bottom line, women don't trust other women that much. They may, in a naive sort of way, and maybe a light shadow sort of way, they do. All right, but we don't. And the problem here is that we paint with too broad a brush right now. That we're talking about dynamics of specific interactions that have happened female to female, woman to woman, male to male, and interaction between masculine and feminine. And there are certain dynamics of emotional response that have developed over many years of interaction, right? And not so positive interaction. And so what you've got right now is you've got a ton of young, angry, enraged, outraged women, a whole generation of them, as well as a whole bunch of young men who are willing to do whatever they tell them. And so if you look at the dynamic of what's going on in your world, why are these young people so upset? Well, it's not the race thing. It's the fact that they have no prospects for the future. They have a big college debt or something like that, and the other generations have basically stolen all the wealth. Yeah, they have a right to be angry, certainly so. Nobody's acknowledging that fact. Acknowledge that fact and make some moves to change things. Well, you might just begin to solve some of these problems. But again, you have to be willing to look at the other side of it. You have to be willing to step back and be objective. So, we have just, you and we have just performed a prime example of the masculine and feminine being at loggerheads.
Yeah, I'm arguing with an oversoul about this. Yeah.
Well,
I have my own experiences and I'm coming from my own, I'm coming from a different perspective. Yeah.
right,
And
right.
I am just stubborn enough to argue it. But I think that my view is very expansive. And in fact, I don't consider myself a feminist at all, actually. And I acknowledge the fact that I myself have a lot more work to do in terms of honoring the masculine in my life personally. And I feel
Right.
like most women should take responsibility for that if there's an imbalance there. And I think that that's kind of the point, right? That's where I'm coming from, right?
That's
So I
exactly the
don't think
point.
it's your typical, right. I don't think what I would hope to offer for those who ask is some sort of, She-Ra male haters club or whatever. I don't, or whatever it was on the, on that old show. Um,
Our
yeah,
our
no,
our
I don't think that's
suggestion
what I'm,
our suggestion in this dynamic would be go ahead and form the group and then talk to us about it afterwards. Because
so too. I'm not looking for approval there, but okay.
but what we would say to you is, because you don't have you're not typical. Okay, talking to you, we knew the first time that we met you that you were not typical. We know who you are. We know who you are better than you know who you are. All right, why? Because we get to talk to your soul, you know. Um, and so
Okay. Yeah.
we're just trying to gently steer you in a direction. We say that the dynamics of the feminine right now are that they believe that they need to be protected from the masculine, when in fact, the masculine and the feminine need to begin to find ways to actually work together. And so, but work together in a fair and equitable sort of way to be able to manifest for the greater good, not just the personal greater good. And so that's the energy that needs to happen. That is the energy that puts anyone who, for example, goes through something like the Peace Genesis Project, puts them on equal footing, allows them to create a reality from there that is more cleaner and more understandable and has less mm, subconscious negativity attached to it. So that's what you're seeking to overcome. In so many ways, you're seeking to overcome your original programming and the reinforcements that came on that dynamic throughout your life. You know, those of you that are out there that are here to learn about love, you don't have one love example. You have a whole series of love examples where you wound up with the same emotional feeling at the end, whether it's betrayal or abandonment or rage or any number of, you know, any number of things. If you're having a repetitive emotional dynamic, well, you need to question about who you're choosing as lovers, you know, who you're choosing to give you love. We worked. We have a couple minutes. Just as an example, we were working out in Indiana, and we would, you know, travel around to different groups. Like we're going to be in your group on October the 10th. Um, um, we will. We were traveling around to different. Do you like that? Paid political announcement. And with the pastor of the spiritualist church, we had a nice group there. In fact, a couple of the people that were there. How many years ago was that? 20. Still follow us. So, um, um, but what happened was that the pastor there had, oh, she talked to us. She had been in this terrible relationship after relationship, and we brought out the fact to her that he betrayed her, and but she thought that this time it was the one, and but again she suffered that whole dynamic of betrayal, and so we asked her, so what was he like? Well, what type of man was he like? Then, well, it's just a love thing, and I fell into this again. When, in other words, she wasn't very conscious of the dynamic at all. So she picked herself another loser that would, in fact, um, have that dynamic of betrayal happen again one more time to say to her, hey, you need to pick a different kind of man. And so when we came back the next year, and we said to her then, at that time beforehand, we said to her, and by picking a different type of man, it's really going to take work because you're going to have to really learn about what love is like. Son of gun, she didn't do it. And a year later, she was deeply involved in a relationship with this little guy. He was about a foot shorter than she was, but they were getting it together. They were truly in love. And it was why? Because it was the type of person that she never would have chosen before. Again, it's an interesting dynamic, but, and she finally answered her, are you sure? She finally answered the dynamic of her life lesson by choosing someone that wasn't going to abandon her, wasn't going to betray her.
Mhm.
So again, do you have to go through deep healing? No, you have to be able to make the choice, and then you have to be able to stick with the choice when you do make it.
Mhm. Interesting. Well, we'll have to see how that works
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah,
see it firsthand when you
yeah,
come
yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. So,
Which I am looking forward to. Oh, I said which I'm looking forward to.
ah, well, okay. Well, we're willing to play. We'll play for sure.
Cool. So it was really nice speaking with you today. It's always a pleasure. Always very illuminating. I'm looking forward to talking with you again. You're going to be coming to Star and Splendor in Voorheesville, New York, October 10th. We're going to host you for a conversation with SOTU. That'll be open to the public by reservation. Um, and so maybe you can tell folks where they can find out more about you, about Josh, about the Peace Genesis Project, and this event.
All right. Well, this event will be advertised up on our website and as well as on Amy's website. Our website, we have two, is conversations with SOTU.org and peacegenesisproject.org. And you can check us out and check our schedule out on either website. We have a Facebook Live that we do every Saturday, and we believe we're going to be doing a Facebook Live before we do the session at your store, we believe also, before we do the conversation session. So if you wanted to come a little early and observe that dynamic, we will be taking 15 or 20 minutes between the sessions before we start the conversations. But feel free to come on by and check us out. And um, um, we are intending to also continue our Healing the Rift show that we do on Blog Talk Radio every Sunday morning at 11 to 12:30. And we hope to see you in October and for our coming out party.
Yes,
Well,
coming out again into the world.
that's right, unless they chase us down, but we won't talk too much about it.
Right.
How many cops do you
So,
have in
and
Voorheesville?
everybody, I don't know. There's just sheriff, I think, and there's
Yeah,
just maybe about three or four.
yeah, okay.
um, so folks can find me at Star and Splendor. So it's www.starandsplendor, all spelled out.com. We're also active on Facebook, on Instagram at the same handle. And there's a YouTube channel too, which I am starting to upload more videos to. So more opportunities to hear my thoughts on things if you care to. So this video will also go there. But yeah, have a great day, everybody. It was really nice to talk with you, SOTU, and Josh and Adrienne. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, dear one.